Hello, and welcome to Tales for Life. In each episode of this podcast, we'll explore a folk or fairy tale from a different culture or region and discover the life lessons, values, and morals they offer that we can use today. Join me on the journey through the magical and meaningful world of folk and fairy tales. Welcome, story lovers, to this week's episode of Tales for Life, the podcast that journeys through life one tale at a time. If you've ever doubted your own worth, and honestly, who hasn't at some point, this is an episode for you. Today's episode is one I've titled, The Worth of a Lifetime. Self-worth is one of those unseen forces that shapes everything we do. When we feel grounded in who we are, when we trust that our life has meaning and weight, we move through the world with composure. We take chances, we speak up, we offer what we have without apology. Healthy self-worth isn't arrogance. It's the simple recognition that your life, your experiences, and your presence matter. And believing this allows you to live more fully, more generously, and more freely. But it's easy to lose sight of that. Maybe we think we're too young to know anything worth sharing. Maybe we think we're too old and that our best days are behind us. Maybe we compare ourselves to people who seem more educated, more accomplished, more something. And while there may be areas where we're still growing, and that's true for all of us, we can't let one perceived lack define our entire being. Because however long we've lived, whatever we've done or endured or learned, we've accumulated worth simply by being here. A lifetime, no matter its length or shape, carries wisdom, strength, and value. And that brings us to today's tale. A Japanese story known as Old Folks' Mountain. It's a story about age and youth, about what we carry with us, and about how the things we've learned, and even the ones that seem small or useless, can become exactly what's needed when the moment arrives. Let's step into it together. In the olden days, when Japan was not yet a unified nation, the land was divided into any number of smaller countries. Each of these was ruled by a lord who had absolute authority over the local people. Legend has it that the lord of one little country in a mountainous region where the people were very poor made a law that all people of 60 years or more would be considered too old to work. And since there was scarcely enough food for those who did work, anyone who reached 60 was to be taken to a certain mountain near the border and left there to die. The penalty for disobeying this law was extremely severe, and few were the families that hadn't had the bitter experience of parting with a loved one on Old Folks' Mountain. It was in this country that an old woman lived with her son. Though they had no other relatives and were terribly poor, they were devoted to each other and happy with their simple life together. The son thought his mother the sweetest, gentlest person in the world, and it was his fondest dream to stay with her always so he could take care of her in her old age. But he knew it was not to be, and his heart grew ever heavier as the old woman's 60th birthday approached. On the evening of the last day of his mother's 59th year, the young man sat down with her at the dinner table. He felt much too miserable to eat, and after a long silence he looked up sorrowfully and said, "Ma, let's not go to Old Folks' Mountain tomorrow. Let's wait a while." The old woman smiled gently and shook her head. "No, son, the longer we put it off, the harder it'll be. And there's nothing to be so sad about, really. We'll be together again someday." Her brave words only made her son feel sadder, however. That night he couldn't sleep at all. He spent the hours tossing and turning and praying that morning would never come. But come it did. "We'd better leave now, son. said the old woman, kneeling beside his mattress at the break of dawn. "It's a long way to Old Folks Mountain and back." With tears welling up in his eyes, the young man reluctantly fetched the frame that he used for carrying firewood. He sat his mother down upon it, and when he lifted her, frame and all, onto his back, he was filled with grief to find how light she was. She hardly seemed to weigh anything at all, yet the young man's footsteps as he started along the road were those of someone with a nearly unbearable burden. By early afternoon they were halfway up the mountain. The young man picked his way over a series of narrow, treacherous ledges, across a rickety bridge and up a steep, winding trail overgrown with weeds. Crows were cawing in the treetops overhead. "Ma!" they seemed to cry. "Ma! Ma!" Images from the past ran through the young man's mind. Times his mother had soothed and comforted him. Times she'd scolded him. Happy times, hard times, times of worry and times of ease. All the trouble he'd caused her as a mischievous child. The young man was wiping the tears from his eyes when he suddenly became aware that with every few steps he took, he could hear a small snapping sound behind him. He turned his head to look and saw that his mother was breaking the twigs of trees and bushes they passed. "Why are you doing that, Ma?" he asked. "So you won't get lost on the way back home, son. See? All you have to do is follow the broken off twigs." So moved was he by this that he broke down sobbing, unable to walk another step. "This is as good a spot as any, son," said the gentle old woman, spreading her straw mat on the ground. "I'll be fine here. Now you'd better hurry on home before it gets dark." "Ma! Ma!" cried the man, clasping her hands in his. He couldn't bring himself to say goodbye. At last he tore himself away, turned, and began to stagger weakly down the mountain path. He couldn't even bear to look back. The young man was following the trail of broken twigs when, blinded by his tears, he stumbled on a rock and fell to the ground. "Why bother to get up?" he asked himself wearily as he lay there. "What good will going home do me? It won't even be home anymore." When at last he sat up and opened his eyes, he saw that snow had begun to fall. "Poor Ma," he moaned, "how cold you must be." It was then that he made up his mind, law or no law, he couldn't leave his mother to die on that lonely mountain. He ran back up the path as fast as he could. When he reached the spot where his mother sat, she looked up at him, astonished. "What happened, son?" she asked. "Let's go, Ma. Let's go home." "But son, we can't. You'll be punished." "I don't care. I don't care what they do to me. I can't leave you here." So saying, he picked her up and carried her down the path toward home. That very night, the young man dug a cellar beneath the floorboards of his house, where his mother could live without anyone knowing. Every evening from then on, he lowered food down to her on a tray and sat there talking with her while she ate. "Ma, I wish you didn't have to stay in that dark place," he'd say. "Oh, I don't mind, son," his mother would always reply. "At least we're still together." And so the weeks and months went by. Each morning the son went out to work. Each evening he came back home, and no one ever guessed his secret. Life went on as usual. But one day, the young man saw a notice by the side of the road. The notice carried the seal of the local lord and warned the people that the lord of the neighboring country, a famous samurai with a great army at his disposal, had threatened them with war. But since he could hardly invade the neighboring country without some excuse, he had asked for a certain gift. Failure to produce the gift would be regarded as an insult and reason enough to attack. The problem was that the gift he demanded was something no one had ever seen before: a rope made of ashes. The young man read the notice to the end. "Anyone who brings to the castle a rope of ashes," it said, "shall be given a large reward." But how could anyone make such a rope? All day long the young man racked his brains trying to think of a solution, as did most of the people in the country. But no one could come up with an answer. That night, as the young man lowered his mother's food down to her, he told her of the samurai lord's demand. "Why, that's easy, son," she said. "All you have to do is this. Make a strong, tightly wound rope, coil it up, and soak it in salt water. Then, after it's dried out, just set it on a board and burn it." The young man did exactly as she said, and sure enough, when the rope had burned, it left behind a perfect coil of ashes. He immediately carried the ash rope to the castle and presented it to the Lord. "Young man, you've saved the country," cried the Lord. "Take this sack of silver and gold as your rightful reward, and know that you have the gratitude of all the people." Imagine the young man's joy to receive the sorely needed money, and the pride he felt in knowing that his mother's wisdom had actually prevented a war. But it was only a few days later that the samurai lord came forth with a second demand. This one seemed even more impossible than the first. He sent a small green bamboo shoot with 7 crooked joints and demanded that it be returned to him with a thread running through it from one end to the other, and that this be done without damaging the shoot. The notices went up again, and again the man consulted his mother. "Nothing to it, son," she said. "Cover one end of the bamboo with sugar, then tie a thread to an ant and set him inside the other end. He'll head straight for the sugar and bring the thread through with him." The son ran to the castle and told the Lord what to do, and it worked. The country was saved again, and the young man went home with another sack of silver and gold. But not more than 2 or 3 days later, however, the samurai lord sent a third demand. If this one was met, he promised, there would be no more demands and the 2 countries would remain at peace. But this time, when the notices went up, the young man doubted if even his mother would have a solution. The samurai lord had demanded a drum that would sound without being beaten. "Ma," the young man said that night, "do you think it would be possible to make a drum that makes a sound all by itself?" "Why, sure, son," the mother replied. "All you have to do is build the drum around a hornet's nest. The hornets will bang against the inside of the skin trying to get out." The man did exactly as his mother had told him, and carried the self-beating drum to the castle. The Lord was ecstatic. "My good man," he said to the son, "how can we ever thank you? You saved the country again, and this time it's for good. But how did you do it? Did you really come up with all those solutions yourself?" This was the question the man had been fearing the most, but he couldn't tell a lie to his Lord. He confessed everything, including how he'd been hiding his mother. "I see," said the Lord when the man had finished. "So if it weren't for the wisdom of one old woman, our country would have been ruined." The Lord didn't punish the young man for keeping his mother. In fact, he was so impressed with what had happened that he decided to do away with his cruel law. Never again would anyone be abandoned on Old Folks Mountain. And the young man and his mother, of course, lived happily ever after. Stories like Old Folks Mountain stay with us because they hold a kind of truth that doesn't fade. It's a dark tale in places, yes, but it carries a bright ending, and an even brighter meaning. It reminds us that even in the hardest moments, the things we've lived, learned, and carried forward matter. And while it's more legend than history, it persists because it speaks to something deeply human, the worth we accumulate simply by being alive. When we look at the young man in this story, we see a lesson that might be even more important than the one his mother teaches. He recognizes her worth, not because she can work or earn or contribute in the way society tends to measure value, but because she is his mother. He remembers her love, her scolding, her presence, the years they shared. He understands that a person's worth isn't tied to money or status or usefulness. It's rooted in the life they've lived and the love they've given. And that realization is what moves him to break the law, to risk everything, because he knows her worth is immeasurable. But the most obvious lesson here is the worth of a lifetime of living, embodied in the old woman herself. This story highlights her ability to solve impossible tasks, but what it's really spotlighting is her experience, the decades of living that shaped her mind and sharpened her insight. Her son can't match it. The Lord of the land can't match it. No one can, because each of our lives is singular. Our experiences, our thoughts, our scars, our joys, they belong only to us. In the entire history of humankind, no one has ever lived your life, and no one ever will. That uniqueness is worth honoring, worth protecting, and worth celebrating. So as you head into the week, remember this: your worth isn't something you earn, it's something you carry. Every year, every lesson, every moment has shaped you into someone irreplaceable. Trust that. Lean into it. Let the life you've lived remind you of the strength you already have. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me again next week for another episode of Tales for Life.